talk about the left, you remember the days in which, this goes back to 2019, there was a lot of talk of woke capital, there was a lot of talk of ESG, and of course DEI later on. There were articles written about how basically every one of our large corporations were now taken over by the woke, and this got even more exacerbated. This got a bigger deal during BLM, where every corporation had to make a definitive statement in support of BLM, and generally there was just this. It seemed like the far left, the crazy left, were basically in charge of much of the politics, at least, and the cultural social statements being made by corporation, and the term woke capital came about, and it became more and more prevalent, and it seemed like it kind of peaked. It was very, very out there in 2021, 2022. There's actually a graph that somebody created of U.S. listed company earning calls where executives mention ESG or DEI, environmental, social, and governance, diversity, equity, inclusion, or sustainability. So basically they did a search on all earning calls, and they looked for ESG, DEI, and then spelt out environmental, social, governance, diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. So those terms. And they did a search, and they found that peaked in the first quarter of 2022. Since then, there's been a sharp decline in the mention of those names on earning calls, and really this phenomena, before 2019, there was almost no talk of this. It rose into 2021, and then during COVID, it just exploded. And that, I think, to a large extent, is BLM. BLM just drove that into the stratosphere. That was perceived to be the morally right position to have, the moral high ground, and corporations just embraced it and spent a lot of time, resources, effort, thinking on articulating their irrational and pretty radical left views on these things. This all seems to have shifted. We see it in this graph where these concepts, these ideas, are not being mentioned. You also see it in the fact that Google just fired 28 employees because they were protesting in a sit-in in the office of one of Google's senior managers, protesting the fact that Google provides cloud computing services to the Israeli government. They were basically all fired. The CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, has sent a lengthy memo to the company following the firing of the employees, and he in the memo he says, quote, "Google is a business and not a place to act in a way that disrupts coworkers or makes them feel unsafe. To attempt to use the company as a personal platform or to fight over disruptive issues or debate politics." He does not want any of that. So that's a big change. And this is Google, maybe one of the worst offenders of the whole woke. Now, it hasn't gone completely. Apple still constantly talks about sustainability and all this nonsense. So one of the questions is what explains the turn away from woke among companies, among these corporations? Because this certainly has been, and you can see it in the way they behaved, you can see it in their attitude, you can see it again in their earnings calls. Well, one theory is, I think there are two theories that basically aligned. One is that basically woke became very unpopular among Americans, and as a consequence, and some corporations, if you remember Bud Light and others, were boycotted by the right for being overly woke. And corporations got the message. A lot of states, for example, started divesting their funds from BlackRock because of ESG. So generally, the country, once people realized what was going on, and people realized that these companies were advocating for woke, at least 50% of the country is not woke, much more than that, but a significant percentage, a significant majority of the country is not woke. And suddenly I think businesses realize, well, wait a second, by being woke, we're offending a lot of people. Is that what we really want to do? These are customers, these are suppliers, these are people we do business with. We shouldn't offend them. And I think a lot of companies have backtracked from kind of the more radical woke positions as a consequence of just realizing that their customers are not on board. They're just not in line with these views. But there is also a second issue that has to do with why companies are moving away from woke, and that's just straight up competitiveness. Woke and politics and having opinions and disruption at work and discriminating against people at work and so on is just not good business. It's just a distraction from making money. It's a distraction from doing the business of business. And it's true that some companies can be big enough, and during some periods of time, they feel comfortable enough and safe enough and powerful enough that they don't care, in a sense, about small disruptions in business. As markets become more competitive, it becomes much more difficult for businesses to engage in, if you will, hobbies associated with political activism, political points of view, discriminatory actions, and so on. It's just who has the time. We're trying to make a living here. We're trying to make money. So the market, in a sense, forces company away from engaging in activities, in actions and decisions that at the end of the day are not profit maximizing, because if they don't engage in those, if they awoke in spite of the profit losses, then somebody else, competition will arise that will not tolerate the nonsense. And I think that's a big part of this. Google might have tolerated a sit-in, but Google struggling with AI, Google struggling with antitrust lawsuits against it, wondering, what their business is going to look like. Google needs to be focusing on their core business model. Google needs to be focusing on making money. Google needs to be focusing on the business of business. So I don't think it's surprising. Maybe 2 years ago, Google wouldn't have fired those 28 employees who did the sit-in. Today, given the pressures in Google, given the highly, highly competitive nature of AI, which is fundamentally challenging Google's core business, it's not surprising that they don't have time for the BS. They don't have time for the BS. They're cutting down on employee perks, and they're not going to let employees just go crazy with politics on company time.